JFK demurred in his inelegant words, "I don't care if it's horse piss, it works." Little had changed by October 1965. Lyndon Johnson, facing gallbladder surgery and mindful of the political stir caused by his heart attack 10 years earlier, arranged for a secret meeting with Dwight Eisenhower at Andrews Air Force Base outside Washington. Eisenhower advised LBJ to emulate his own openness with the press. The president would gain credit for being candid, a trait infrequently associated with the Johnson White House. Once persuaded, Johnson relished the theatricality of the situation. Following a successful operation, he greeted reporters by lifting his sports shirt to display a foot-long surgical incision where his gallbladder had been. The resulting photograph became an indelible piece of 60s culture. Adapted by the cartoonist David Levine to mock the president's Vietnam policies. Remember the famous cartoon where it became a map of Vietnam on LBJ's belly? It came to symbolize an administration that showed too much and told too little. In the years since, other equally memorable images, Jimmy Carter collapsing while running a strenuous race, or the first George Bush depositing his state dinner in the lap of Japan's prime minister, have provided a kind of medical shorthand for the television audience. And then there's Ronald Reagan. In the summer of 1985, the President of the United States entered Bethesda Naval Hospital, where surgeons successfully operated after discovering an intestinal malignancy. When communicating this news to the public, they made only one mistake. They apparently did not confer with their patient. According to Ronald Reagan, he didn't have cancer. Something inside of him had cancer, and they removed it. Typical Reagan. Typical Reagan. He sees things through his own lens, and everyone else be damned. In tailoring the facts of his health to fit the sunny contours of his temperament, Reagan deceived no one but himself. Ironically, it was in Bethesda that a recuperating president authorized his national security advisor, Bud McFarlane, to embark upon the shadowy trail that led to the Iran-Contra affair. And it's hard to believe now, but there was, in fact, for a while, talk about possibly impeaching the president. More recently, his post-White House diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease has prompted speculation by journalists and others about the final years of the Reagan presidency. I remember Hauenstein, the late Hauenstein, who knew more about the presidency than anyone in America, telling about a direct encounter he had, which he thought was eerie at the time, and even more so in retrospect. Remember those pictures when Reagan went to Moscow, and there's that triumphant stroll through Red Square with Mikhail Gorbachev and the president. Hauenstein was there, of course, and he talked to Reagan in Red Square. And this was Hugh's words, exact words. It was just like talking to protoplasm. He had nothing to say, no observations to make. Hauenstein could not reconcile the monosyllabic Reagan of Moscow with the chatty raconteur whose vivid accounts of his early radio career were literally unforgettable. The incident went unreported and would doubtlessly be forgotten but for his subsequent illness. Reagan's not alone. It's amazing. We now know Hubert Humphrey, of course, died in 1977 of bladder cancer. The first symptoms were detected in 1969. We now know we have the technology that literally could have detected them even earlier. If Humphrey knew in 1967 that he had even the possibility of a fatal illness, would he have run for president in 1968? Should he have run in 1968? In 1972, of course, you had the Thomas Eagleton affair, which in retrospect, although it didn't do much for the Democratic ticket that year, and it certainly put a ceiling on Senator Eagleton's political prospects, in retrospect may have done more than anything else to bring the subject of depression and mental illness out of the closet, not just the political closet, but out of the closet generally. And then, of course, there was Paul Tsongas in 1992, the former senator from Massachusetts, who was apparently quite candid in telling people that he had had cancer and that it had been defeated. And now we learned after the fact that he was not entirely candid, that his doctors, in fact, were part of a conspiracy of silence to suggest that there was no sign, no recurrence of the disease. Well, Paul Tsongas died on what would have been the next to last day of his first term. In 1996, Senator Dole, who was under special pressure because of his age, Senator Dole appeared before the National Governors Association and said, truthfully enough, my weight is lower than Clinton's, my cholesterol is lower than Clinton's, my blood pressure is lower than Clinton's, but I'm not going to make health an issue. In 1996. Later that day, President Clinton spoke to the same gathering, and he said actually he believed that his resting pulse rate was in fact lower than Dole's, but that wasn't Dole's fault. As he put it, I don't have to deal with Phil Graham every day. When Adlai Stevenson used his closing television address of the 1956 campaign to sow seeds of doubt about Dwight Eisenhower's chances to survive a second term, and of course the prospect of Richard Nixon becoming president, he was roundly criticized for a shocking lapse of taste. Half a century later, Saturday Night Live regularly spoofs Cheney's heart condition, and I think most people would think openness is better than taste. If today's journalists are more reluctant to be co-conspirators in a guileful tradition as old as the Republic, one thing at least has not changed. Hugh Sidey told me before he died that the White House staff today, through it all, remains every bit as jealous of information as presidential doctors are possessive of their patient. That it took years for the public to discover how close Ronald Reagan came to dying in the wake of John Hinckley's assassination attempt in March of 1981 only confirms Sidey's observation. No one would be happier than Grover Cleveland. Thank you very much. And now, we've got microphones, questions, comments, observations. Oh, come on. Don't be bashful. Yeah.
Which lie did the most damage to the country?
Oh, gosh. You know, that's a book. I mean, you know, I don't know how to answer that. I think probably each of you would have your own answer, influenced no doubt by your political preferences. I mean, to be blunt. I will say this. I do believe, and I don't mean to pick on him, but I think there's a tragic element to Lyndon Johnson, don't get me wrong. I think Johnson's an almost Shakespearean figure, and he wanted to do good. He wanted, very sincerely, very genuinely, he wanted to fight a war on poverty. He wanted to use government to increase opportunity for people. He wanted to right injustices that were centuries in the making. All of that said, the fact of the matter is, I think he bears an enormous weight of responsibility for undercutting, maybe fatally, the public confidence in the White House. Now, you could say maybe we were too credulous, you know. Maybe we had an unrealistic view. Maybe it was inevitable. Maybe it's even healthy, but it's not healthy. The extremes to which the cynicism and skepticism and reflexive disbelief have taken hold in this country, and I think it really began with Lyndon Johnson's credibility gap. So, you know, sometimes people have the best of motives and they produce the worst of results.